Hi, I'm Khalib, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Wild West Tales of Love. Let's begin the story.
Evelyn Price had been wearing the same wedding dress for 3 days when the little girl in muddy boots asked her to marry a different man. By then, the white fabric was no longer white. Prairie dust had turned the hem brown, the lace cuffs gray, and the ribbon at her waist hung limp like it had given up before she had. Evelyn sat on the station bench at Dustmere with her carpetbag at her feet and a letter in her lap, reading the same lines over and over until the words felt like a joke someone cruel had written just for her. My dearest Evelyn, when your train arrives, I will be waiting. By sunset, you will be my wife. No one had waited, not on the first day when she stepped off the train with trembling hands and a brave smile. Not on the second day when the station master began looking at her with pity. Not on the third day when the telegraph clerk quietly told her there was no ranch in the territory by that name and no man registered under the one she had trusted. The groom in the letters was a ghost. The money she had used for the trip was gone, and the train back east would leave in less than an hour. "Miss Price!" She looked up. Station Master Burke stood nearby, hat in hand, shifting his weight like a man who hated bad news and had to carry it anyway. "I can speak to the conductor," he said. "Might get you a seat for reduced fare. Folks back east are more forgiving than they sound in stories." Back east, Philadelphia. The narrow house with the peeling blue door. Neighbors who smiled with their mouths and whispered with their eyes. Poor Evelyn. She always did believe in pretty promises. Evelyn tightened her grip on the letter. "I'm not going back." Burke sighed and placed a silver dollar on the bench beside her. "Then at least eat. Pride won't fill your stomach." He walked away before she could refuse it. Evelyn stared at the coin. She hated how badly she needed it. A clomp of oversized boots sounded on the platform. She turned and found a child standing in front of her, maybe 8 years old, wearing a faded dress and a pair of men's boots so large her ankles nearly disappeared inside them. Her dark hair was crookedly pinned, and her eyes were a warm gold brown that looked too serious for her little face. "You're the bride," the girl said. Evelyn let out a tired breath. "Not anymore." The child studied her, head tilted. "You've been here 3 days. Mrs. Holloway says you got jilted. Mr. Henson says you're probably dangerous. I think you're just hungry." Before Evelyn could answer, the girl dug into her pocket and pulled out half a biscuit wrapped in cloth. "Here," she said. "I saved it." Evelyn stared at the biscuit. It was dry and hard and the kindest thing anyone had given her all week. "I can't take your breakfast." "It was my second breakfast," the girl said. "I'm Clara Callahan." Evelyn took the biscuit with shaky fingers. "Thank you, Clara." Clara nodded like she had handled an important matter. Then she stepped closer and lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. "My daddy needs a wife," she said. "Will you marry him instead?" Evelyn almost choked on the first bite. "Excuse me?" Clara did not laugh. She was completely serious. "He's a good man. He just don't talk much no more. Since Mama died, he works and forgets things. He burns food. He can't braid hair. He stares at walls like they're talking to him." She paused. "I need somebody in the house who knows how to be alive." The wind pushed across the platform, lifting the edge of Evelyn's veil. A few men near the freight office were pretending not to listen. Evelyn swallowed slowly. "Clara, you can't just ask strangers to marry your father." "Why not?" "Because marriage is not something you decide in 5 minutes." Clara shrugged. "Took me 3 days. I've been watching you." Evelyn blinked. "You've been watching me?" "Making sure you weren't mean." The child looked so matter-of-fact that Evelyn almost laughed, and the surprise of it stung her eyes. "Does your father know you're here?" Evelyn asked. "No. He thinks I'm at Mrs. Henley's helping churn butter." Clara looked pleased with herself. "I left before anybody could stop me." "Clara Callahan, that is not a recommendation for your house." "It is if you like honest people. I told you the truth." That landed harder than Evelyn expected. Honest people. She looked at the letter in her hand, then folded it once, then again, and tucked it into her bag. "Where is your home?" she asked quietly. 3 miles north. Red barn, 2 cottonwoods, ugly fence. Daddy keeps saying he'll fix. Clara reached for the handle of Evelyn's carpet bag. Come for supper first. If you hate us, I'll walk you back. 3 miles is far for you. Clara pulled the bag an inch and grunted. I know. Help me. The station, the tracks, the silver dollar, the eastbound train, the life waiting to judge her all sat behind Evelyn like a closed door. In front of her stood a child in borrowed boots, asking for something impossible with the plain certainty of prayer. Evelyn stood. Her legs wobbled from hunger and too much sitting, but she stood. All right, she said. Supper only. Clara's face lit up like sunrise. That's enough. They walked out of Dustmere with the town watching, past the general store and the blacksmith, past the boarding house where 2 women on the porch paused their conversation to stare, past the last building and into the open land where the sky grew enormous and the world smelled like grass and sun-warmed dirt. Clara talked the whole way about a milk cow that kicked over pails when she was offended, about her father's terrible biscuits, about how her mother used to sing while shelling peas. Evelyn listened and carried her own bag because Clara's brave little body was tiring, though she refused to admit it. When they reached the ranch, Evelyn saw a modest log house, a weathered barn, and a man at the corral lifting a saddle onto a horse. He turned at the sound of Clara's voice. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and rough with work, but not careless. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows, his hands were scarred, his face was sun-browned and stern. Then his eyes found Evelyn. Everything in him went still. Clara, he said, low and controlled. Who is this? Quote. Clara marched up the porch steps like a general returning from war. This is Miss Evelyn Price. She's staying for supper, and maybe longer if you act right. The man closed his eyes for one long second, then looked at Evelyn again. There was weariness in his face, grief too. But beneath both, she saw something she had not seen in any letter. Truth. I'm Samuel Callahan, he said. And I'm sorry for whatever my daughter has dragged you into. Evelyn held his gaze, the wind tugging at her ruined veil. She had come west for a promise built on lies. Now she stood on a stranger's porch, dust-covered, hungry, humiliated, and one heartbeat away from turning back. But when Clara slipped her small hand into Evelyn's and squeezed, Evelyn did not move. I'm not sure yet, she said softly, but I think I may be sorry if I leave. The first thing Evelyn noticed inside the Callahan house was the smell. Burnt onions, wood smoke, coffee boiled too long, and something warm underneath it all that reminded her of kitchens from before life went wrong. The second thing she noticed was how clean everything was. Not polished, not pretty, but clean in the way a place gets when someone is trying very hard to hold it together with sheer effort. The table was scrubbed. The stove was blackened but orderly. The plates on the shelf were stacked by size. Even the boots by the door were lined up like soldiers. A house run by habit, not comfort. Clara proudly dropped Evelyn's carpet bag near the wall. See, told you we got a real house. Samuel gave his daughter a look. Go wash your hands. I did at Mrs. Henley's. Then wash them again. Clara rolled her eyes but obeyed, stomping toward the basin. Samuel turned to Evelyn, and up close she could see the strain around his eyes. He looked like a man who slept in pieces and worked in full days. You're welcome for supper, he said. No obligations attached. Clara means well, but she has a habit of deciding things before other folks get a say. Evelyn nodded. I gathered that. His mouth almost moved toward a smile, then stopped. Can you eat venison stew? Yes. Good. Because that and biscuits are all I've got. From the wash corner, Clara called, and the biscuits are hard enough to kill a man. Clara. I'm just helping Miss Price know what to expect. Evelyn pressed her lips together to hide a laugh. She had not expected to laugh in Wyoming. Not after the station. Not after the letters. Yet here she was, dusty and exhausted, trying not to smile at a child who insulted her father's cooking like it was a civic duty. Samuel moved to the stove and lifted the pot lid. Steam rose into the room. He reached for a spoon, tasted, frowned, then added salt. Clara came back, dripping water from her wrists. "Miss Price can cook," she announced. I asked. Samuel froze for half a second. "Did you now?" Evelyn should have stayed silent. She should have sat politely and eaten whatever they gave her and left at dawn. Instead, she heard herself say, "I can help if you'd like." Samuel shook his head too quickly. "You're a guest. I've sat on a station bench for 3 days. If I sit one more hour, my back may never forgive me." That got him. He looked at the pot, then at her, then stepped aside. "If you ruin it, I'll blame Clara." "Fair?" Evelyn crossed to the stove and took the spoon. The stew was not bad, just flat, a little scorched at the bottom, but salvageable. She found dried thyme hanging near the window, a heel of onion, and a pepper tin. As she worked, she could feel Samuel watching, not in a rude way, but with the guarded attention of someone who had learned not to expect good things. "Where'd you learn to cook?" he asked. "My mother, we didn't always have much. She said seasoning is how poor people win." Clara climbed onto a chair at the table. "Mama used to say that too. Not the poor part, the seasoning part." Silence fell for a beat. Samuel looked down at his hands. Evelyn stirred the stew gently. "Then your mother was right." Quote, "When they finally sat to eat, Clara took one bite and gasped like she'd seen a miracle. 'Daddy,' she whispered, 'it tastes like before.'" Samuel's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. He took a bite, chewed, swallowed. His jaw tightened, and for 1 second Evelyn thought she had done something wrong. Then he stood abruptly. "I need to check the horses." "It's almost dark," Clara said. "They still got legs. They can wander." He was already at the door. It shut behind him with care, not anger, and that somehow made it sadder. Clara stared at her bowl. "I messed it up." "No, sweetheart." Evelyn reached across the table and touched the child's wrist. "You said the truth." Clara's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back fast. "Daddy don't like remembering sometimes." "Most people don't," Evelyn said softly, "but remembering and hurting are not the same thing." Clara considered that while eating, as if filing it away for later. After supper, Evelyn helped wash dishes, though Samuel had not returned yet. Clara dried each plate with fierce concentration and told Evelyn everything important in the house. Which floorboard squeaked? Which cupboard door stuck in wet weather? Which jar held peppermint drops if you were clever enough to reach it? By the time Samuel finally came back, the dishes were done, the table was wiped, and Clara was halfway asleep in her chair. He stopped in the doorway and looked around. The room was no finer than before, but it felt different, softer somehow. Lived in. "I said supper," he said quietly. Evelyn straightened, unsure if he was angry. "I know. And now my kitchen's cleaner than when I left." Quote, "I have poor manners. It's a flaw." Clara snorted without opening her eyes. Samuel exhaled through his nose, and this time the almost smile appeared for real. Brief and tired. "Clara, bed." "I'm not tired." "You're asleep sitting up." Clara slid off the chair, then marched straight to Evelyn and hugged her around the waist with no warning. "Don't leave before breakfast," she mumbled into Evelyn's dress. "Please." Evelyn's throat tightened. She looked up at Samuel over the child's head. His face had gone guarded again. "Clara," he said gently, "Miss Price has her own life." Clara pulled back and looked at him with open defiance. Maybe she don't want that one anymore. Samuel did not answer. He lit a lamp and led Evelyn to the spare room. The room was small, neat and plain, but someone had once cared about making it pretty. A faded quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. A cracked porcelain pitcher sat on the washstand. There were empty hooks on the wall, where dresses had probably hung years ago. "My wife's room," Samuel said, then corrected himself. "Was. Clara sleeps across the hall now, but this stayed empty." Evelyn set a hand on the bedpost. "I can sleep on the sofa." "No bed's made. You're here. You use it." He set the lamp down and turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "I know what folks in town are saying," he said, not looking at her. "About the station. About you being here. They'll say worse if you stay till morning." Evelyn lifted her chin. They already think I'm a fool, quote. His eyes met hers at last, gray and storm-tired. You're not. The words landed with such force she almost swayed. No one had said that to her. Not at the station. Not in Philadelphia. Not even in the mirror. He cleared his throat. Storm's moving in. You can leave at first light if you want. If you don't, I'll drive you to town myself. Thank you. He nodded once and stepped out. Evelyn undressed in the dim lamplight and sat on the edge of the bed in her shift, listening. The house creaked in the wind. Clara coughed once in the next room. A door opened and closed softly, somewhere below. Then boots crossed the porch. Samuel, likely heading to the barn or to the dark, or to whatever place a grieving man went when the walls felt too close. Evelyn lay down and pulled the quilt over herself. It smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. She should leave in the morning. She knew that. Take the silver dollar, find work in town, build something small and respectable from the pieces she had left. That was the sensible path. Then thunder rolled over the prairie, and she thought of Clara's hand in hers, and the way Samuel had said, "You're not like it was a fact he would defend." For the first time in days, Evelyn did not dream of train tracks. She dreamed of a little girl in oversized boots, a weathered kitchen, and a table set for three. She woke before dawn to the sound of a muffled cry. Not loud, not frightened, sick. Evelyn sat up at once. Another sound came from across the hall. Clara, coughing hard. Then Samuel's voice, low and rough with worry. "Easy, honey. Breathe slow." Evelyn was out of bed before she had fully decided to move. By the time she reached Clara's room, Samuel was kneeling beside the child's bed, one big hand on her back, the other holding a cloth to her mouth. Clara's face was flushed deep red in the weak lamplight. "She was fine last night," he said, looking up at Evelyn. The calm in his voice was forced so tight, it was almost breaking. "Now she's burning." Evelyn crossed the room and touched Clara's forehead. "Heat, too much heat. Get fresh water," she said, already reaching for the basin, "and another blanket. Then send for the doctor if the fever climbs." Samuel did not hesitate. He moved fast. As Evelyn wrung out the cloth and laid it across Clara's brow, the child's eyes fluttered open. "Miss Price?" she whispered. "I'm here." Clara's fingers found hers and held on. "Don't go back to the station," she breathed. Evelyn looked toward the doorway, where Samuel had stopped with the water pail in his hands, listening. Outside, the storm broke over the house. Inside, with a feverish child gripping her hand and a grieving father watching her like she might be the only steady thing left in the world, Evelyn heard herself answer before fear could stop her. "I'm not going anywhere." By noon, the storm had passed, but Clara's fever had not. The rain washed the yard clean and left the world bright, almost cheerful, which felt cruel to Evelyn as she sat beside the bed changing cool cloths every few minutes. Clara drifted in and out, cheeks burning, curls stuck damply to her forehead, one small hand clinging to Evelyn's sleeve whenever she stirred. Samuel moved through the house like a man trying not to panic. He heated water, split wood, checked the horse, rechecked the horse, opened the door to look at the sky, closed it, asked if Clara needed more blankets, less blankets, broth, doctor, prayer, and then asked the same things again 10 minutes later. "She needs the fever to break," Evelyn said gently. "What if it don't?" Evelyn looked at him. There was fear in his face now, naked and unhidden, and she understood at once this was not just about a child being sick. This was memory. This was old grief rising like floodwater. "It will," she said, though she could not know. He nodded like he was taking orders in a war. By evening, Clara began to mutter in her sleep. Sometimes she called for water. Once, she called for her mother. Samuel left the room at that and stood in the hallway with both hands braced against the wall, head bowed. Evelyn followed a moment later. She asked for her mama. He said, voice rough. "Last time Sarah had the fever, Clara kept asking the same thing, and I kept lying, saying Mama was sleeping, Mama was resting, Mama was getting better." He swallowed hard. "I don't think I can do this again." Evelyn stepped closer. "You can," she said. He shook his head. "You don't know what it was like." "No," she said. "I don't. But I know what it is to sit and wait while your whole future falls apart, and nobody can stop it. I know what helpless feels like." His eyes lifted to hers. "Then help me," he whispered. So she did. Through the night they worked side by side. Evelyn cooled cloths and coaxed spoonfuls of water between Clara's lips. Samuel kept the fire steady and held his daughter when the coughing fits came. At some point, near midnight, Clara started crying without waking, a thin, broken sound. Samuel sat on the edge of the bed and took her little hand in both of his. "Clara bird," he said quietly. "Daddy's here." Her breathing eased a little. "Talk to her," Evelyn said. He looked at her like she'd asked him to move a mountain. "About what?" "Anything. A story. Your voice may help." He stared at Clara for a long moment, then nodded once. "When your mama first came west," he began, each word slow and rusty. "She stepped off the train in boots too fine for mud and gloves too soft for weather. I thought she'd take one look at this place and go straight back east." Clara's lashes fluttered. Samuel went on. He told stories Evelyn had never heard. How Sarah burned biscuits her first week and cried over them, and then made the best bread in the county a month later. How she learned to ride, badly at first, stubbornly always. How she painted the kitchen curtains yellow because she said every house in Wyoming looked like it was afraid of joy. How she laughed when calves licked her hands. How she sang while shelling peas. His voice changed as he spoke. It warmed, deepened, became less like a man speaking from duty, and more like a man remembering someone he had loved with his whole life. Evelyn watched him and felt something shift inside her. This was not a hard man. This was a tender man who had been carrying too much pain alone. Near dawn, Clara's fever finally broke. It happened all at once. Sweat dampened her nightdress. Her breathing slowed. The terrible heat under her skin began to fade. Samuel let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for 2 years. He bowed over Clara's hand and closed his eyes. Evelyn touched his shoulder. "She's through it." He looked up at her, eyes red from exhaustion. "You stayed." The words were simple, but full of something larger. Evelyn held his gaze. "I told her I would." For a second, neither of them moved. Then Clara mumbled, half asleep, "I'm hungry." Samuel laughed. It came out cracked and surprised, but it was a laugh. Evelyn smiled so hard, it almost hurt. By afternoon, Clara was sitting up in bed, weak but bossy again, which Samuel said was the best sign possible. She insisted on toast, then jam, then both. Then she announced to Evelyn, very seriously, "Since you kept me alive, you can't leave now. It would be rude." Samuel, pouring coffee nearby, nearly choked. "Clara." "It would," she repeated. "Mama said people should finish what they start." Evelyn smoothed the blanket over Clara's legs to hide her own shaking hands. "And what is it you think I started?" Clara looked at her like the answer was obvious. "Us." That evening, after Clara fell asleep for real, worn out from recovery and too much talking, Evelyn found Samuel at the kitchen table with a stack of ledgers. Numbers covered the pages in heavy pencil, crossed out and rewritten so many times the paper looked bruised. "You keep those like they insulted your family," she said softly. He glanced up, tired but calmer than before. "They have." She pulled out a chair. "Let me see." He hesitated, then slid the ledger across. The books were a mess, but not hopeless. Feed costs, taxes, notes due. 2 missed payments. A contract for cattle that had lapsed. The ranch was hanging on, but barely. Evelyn ran a finger down one column. "You're not sinking because the ranch is bad. You're sinking because you've been doing 3 jobs alone." He leaned back, watching her. "And what would you know about ranch books?" "I taught arithmetic to boys who thought subtraction was a government plot." She turned a page. "This is easier." To her surprise, he smiled again, small and tired and real. They worked for 2 hours. Evelyn sorted overdue amounts into piles, made a list of what had to be paid first, what could wait, and which accounts might be renegotiated. Samuel answered her questions in short, practical phrases. How many cattle he could sell without hurting winter stock, what the feed merchant might accept, which neighbors could be trusted. When they were done, there was a plan on the table, not a miracle, but a plan. Samuel rubbed a hand over his face. I should have done this months ago. You were busy surviving. That's not the same as living. No, Evelyn said quietly, it isn't. Quote. Silence settled between them, but it was not empty. At last he said, if you need work, temporary, I can pay a little. Room and board besides. Clara could use lessons. House could use help. I could use... He stopped. Evelyn waited. He looked at the ledger instead of her. Help. She should have asked for terms, wages, duration, boundaries. Instead, she thought of the station bench, of Philadelphia, of Clara's hand grabbing hers in the dark, of Samuel telling stories to bring his daughter back from fever. How long? She asked. He lifted his eyes. Till spring, maybe. Till you decide what you want. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then I'll stay till spring. Relief crossed his face so quickly he probably did not know she saw it. Thank you, he said. The next weeks passed in the shape of work. Evelyn rose before dawn and learned the rhythm of the Callahan house. Coffee first. Then biscuits, now soft because Samuel finally admitted he never measured anything. Then Clara's hair, which Evelyn braided each morning while the child recited spelling words and asked impossible questions. Why did grown men lie in letters? Why did cows stare at storms? Why did grief make people mean sometimes? Evelyn answered what she could and kissed the top of Clara's head when she could not. She cleaned the spare room and then the rest of the house. She mended curtains, sorted the pantry, found Sarah's recipe box and used it. Though the first time she opened it, she whispered a private apology to a woman she had never met. At first, Samuel kept a careful distance. He was polite, grateful, guarded. He left money for supplies on the table without handing it to her. He thanked her for meals while standing near the door. He watched her with a look she could not read whenever Clara laughed too loudly. But little by little, the distance changed. He began drinking his coffee at the table instead of on the porch. He asked her opinion on feed prices. He let her reorder the kitchen and then admitted, after 3 days, that he could actually find things now. One cold morning, she was carrying a bucket from the pump when she slipped in mud. Samuel caught her before she hit the ground, one arm around her waist, the other steadying the bucket. For one suspended second, she was pressed against him, breathless, aware of his warmth and the strength in the hand at her back. He stepped away at once. You all right? Yes. His jaw tightened. Ground slick. Yes, she said again, though the mud was not what had made her heart stumble. Clara saw everything. Children always did. That night, while Evelyn tucked her into bed, Clara whispered, Daddy likes you. Evelyn nearly dropped the quilt. Clara. He does. He gets that look. What look? The one like he's scared and happy at the same time. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed. Your father misses your mother. Clara's expression softened. I know. I miss her too. Missing somebody don't mean you can't love another person. The words were so plain, so wise, that Evelyn had no answer. Winter edged closer. The first hard frost silvered the grass. Then, one afternoon, trouble came riding up the lane in a black coat and a smug smile. Marcus Briggs, tax assessor. Samuel's posture changed the moment he saw him. Evelyn was on the porch, shelling beans with Clara. She set the bowl aside and stood. Briggs climbed down from his horse and looked around the ranch with lazy contempt. Callahan, he said, you're behind. Samuel came from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Due date's not till month's end. Briggs shrugged. Policy changed. By who? By men with offices. His eyes slid to Evelyn. and this must be the station bride. Heard you found yourself a useful arrangement." The insult was quiet, but sharp. Evelyn met his gaze. "If you came to collect taxes, collect them. If you came to gossip, Mrs. Holloway's porch is in town." Clara made a choking sound that was definitely a laugh. Briggs's smile thinned. $200 by the end of the month, or I begin foreclosure proceedings." Samuel went still. "That's more than we owe. That's what the books say now." "You crooked," Clara started. "Inside," Samuel snapped. Clara stomped but went. Muttering words Evelyn pretended not to hear. Briggs tipped his hat with mock politeness. "Pleasure doing business." When he was gone, Samuel stood staring down the road like he might tear it up with his hands. "He can't do that," Evelyn said. "He can. He has. To others." "How much do you actually owe?" Samuel looked tired all over again. "Enough to ruin us if he pushes." That night, after Clara was asleep, Evelyn spread the ledgers out again. She did the numbers twice, then a third time. No matter how she turned them, they were short. Badly short. Samuel sat across from her, elbows on his knees, looking older than his years. "I can sell stock," he said, "at low price, maybe enough if weather holds." "And if weather doesn't?" He gave her a bleak look. "Then we lose the ranch." Evelyn stared at the columns of figures until the ink blurred. Then her eyes lifted to the pantry shelves. Rows of jars. Pickled beets from Sarah's recipes. Apple preserves. Dried herbs hanging by the window. An idea arrived, so suddenly she sat up straight. "What do women in town buy for winter?" she asked. Samuel frowned. "What?" "From the store. What can't they get enough of?" He blinked. "Sugar, flour, salt, why?" "No, I mean, what can't they get made? Good bread, jam, butter, soap, dried fruit. Things people pay extra for because they don't have time." He stared at her. She felt the plan building as she spoke. "We have milk. We have fruit. We have a kitchen. We have me. If we can make enough to sell before month's end, even a little, we might close the gap." Samuel looked doubtful. "That's women's pin money, not tax money." "Then we make more than pin money." He opened his mouth, closed it, then gave one short laugh of disbelief. "You really do sound like a schoolteacher." "Are you saying no?" He studied her in the lamplight. There was flour on her sleeve, hair coming loose from its pins, a smudge of pencil on her thumb from balancing his books. He looked at her a long time. Finally, he said, "I'm saying if anybody can bully this house into earning $200 in 3 weeks, it's probably you." It was not romance. It was not a proposal. But it felt like trust. The next days were a blur. Evelyn made lists and schedules and sent Clara with notes to neighbors. Samuel hauled extra milk and built rough shelves in the cool room. Mrs. Henley lent canning jars. Widow Patterson traded sugar for future preserves. Mrs. Holloway promised to talk up their goods in town, which meant every soul in Dustmere would know by sunset. They worked from dark to dark. Evelyn boiled fruit until the kitchen windows steamed, churned butter until her arms shook, baked loaves before sunrise and wrapped them in clean cloth. Clara tied labels with crooked handwriting that read Callahan Ranch Kitchen. Samuel delivered goods to the general store and came back with orders. Actual orders. By the second week, they had coins in a jar on the shelf. Not enough, never enough, but growing. One night, after Clara had fallen asleep at the table and Samuel carried her to bed, Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, stirring pear preserves long after her shoulders started aching. Samuel returned and took the spoon from her hand without a word. "You need sleep," he said. "So do you." "I can stir." She watched him at the stove, sleeves rolled, face lit by firelight, moving with steady patience. "Why are you helping this much?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Beyond the ranch, I mean." He did not look at her. "Because Clara smiles again." The spoon kept moving in slow circles. Then he added, quieter, "Because the house don't feel empty when you're in it." Evelyn forgot what she was about to say. The preserves bubbled. The wind moved softly against the windows. At last she said, "Samuel." He looked up. There were 100 things she could have said, dangerous things, hopeful things. Instead, she stepped closer and touched his wrist, the one holding the spoon. "I'm glad I stayed," she whispered. Something changed in his face. Not all at once, like dawn, not lightning. He set the spoon down carefully. His free hand rose, slow enough that she could have stepped away if she wanted. She did not. His knuckles brushed her cheek, rough and gentle at the same time. "Evelyn," he said, and her name in his voice was almost a prayer. Then Clara's sleepy voice came from the hallway. "Are the pears done, or are y'all just standing there?" Samuel closed his eyes. Evelyn laughed into her hand. The moment broke, but not badly. Nothing was spoken after that. Nothing needed to be. 3 days before the tax deadline, they were still short. $31. Evelyn counted the coins twice, then sat back hard in her chair. "We are not losing for $31, she said. Samuel rubbed his jaw. "I can borrow." "From who?" He did not answer. She knew what that meant. Men who charged interest like knives. Before she could speak, Clara ran in from outside, breathless. "Mr. Henley says church socials tomorrow. Everyone's bringing food to sell for the roof fund, but Reverend's roof ain't leaking no more, so Mrs. Holloway says we should bring our things and let people buy those too." Evelyn and Samuel looked at each other. A church social. Half the county. Cash sales. By lantern light they baked, churned, wrapped, labeled, and packed until the stars faded. At the social, Dustmere turned out in full force. Children ran between tables. Women traded recipes and gossip. Men pretended not to enjoy both. At first, people bought from the pies and cakes. Then Mrs. Holloway stood at the center of the yard and announced, loud enough for heaven to hear, "If you have any sense at all, you'll buy the Callahan preserves before I buy every last jar myself." That did it. By noon, their table was surrounded. By afternoon, nearly empty. Clara handled coins with solemn importance. Samuel hauled crates and tried not to look shocked every time another person handed over money. Evelyn smiled until her cheeks hurt. Marcus Briggs arrived just before sunset, as if he had smelled hope and come to spoil it. He stopped at their table, looked at the nearly sold-out goods, and sneered. "Playing shopkeeper now, Callahan?" Samuel's jaw clenched. Evelyn slid the money box closer to herself. "Jealous?" A few people nearby laughed. Briggs's face reddened. "Tomorrow's the deadline." "We know," Samuel said. Briggs leaned in. "When I take that ranch, I'll tear down your barn first." Samuel moved so fast Evelyn barely saw it. 1 second he was behind the table. The next he was nose to nose with Briggs, voice low and deadly. "You come on my land again with that mouth, and the whole territory will hear how far I threw you." The yard went silent. Then old Pete from near the cider barrel called out, "I'd pay to see that." Laughter rolled across the churchyard. Briggs stepped back, humiliated, and rode off without another word. That night, at the kitchen table, they counted everything. Coins, notes, orders still due. When the final stack was done, Evelyn stared at the number. Then she looked at Samuel. "We have it." He blinked. "What?" "All of it." 212. For a second he just sat there. Then he laughed once in complete disbelief. Clara screamed and leaped into both of them at once, nearly upsetting the table. "We saved it! We saved it!" Samuel caught his daughter with one arm and the edge of the table with the other. Evelyn was laughing too and crying, and too tired to tell which was which. The next morning they rode into town together. Samuel paid Briggs in full at the assessor's office. Briggs counted twice, angry with every coin. When he finished, he shoved the receipt across the desk. "This don't change what people say," he muttered, eyes cutting toward Evelyn. Samuel reached for the paper, but Evelyn got there first. She folded it neatly and put it in her bag. Then she looked Briggs square in the eye. People can say what they like, she said. I know where I sleep, who I work with, and what I'm worth. That's more than you can say. Briggs said nothing. They walked out into the cold sunlight. The street looked ordinary. Wagons, dust, dogs. Men talking outside the mercantile. But to Evelyn, it felt like the whole world had shifted. They had done it. Not by rescue, not by luck, by work. On the ride home, Clara fell asleep against Samuel's back in the saddle wagon, worn out from excitement. Evelyn sat beside them, holding the reins when the road flattened. After a while, Samuel said, "You could still leave in spring." She kept her eyes on the road. "I know." He was quiet so long she thought he would say nothing more. Then, "Do you want to?" Evelyn swallowed. The field spread gold-brown under the winter sky. The house appeared in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney. Their chimney, her mind said before she could correct it. Clara stirred in her sleep and leaned harder against her father. Samuel looked straight ahead, but his hand had tightened on the seat. Evelyn let the silence sit between them a moment longer, because some truths deserve their full weight. Then she answered, "No." Samuel breathed out slowly, almost soundless. When they reached the yard, Clara woke and jumped down before the wagon stopped moving. She ran to the porch, turned, and shouted with wild certainty to the empty prairie, to the sky, to anyone listening at all. "Miss Evelyn ain't leaving!" Samuel looked at Evelyn then. No smile, no careful distance, no wall. Just that storm-gray gaze, honest and steady, and full of something that made her heart ache in the best way. "Good," he said. It was only one word, but this time, it sounded exactly like home.
If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and comment. Thanks for watching.